Hello family, this is African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. Before I get started, I'm going to be on a channel called Lip Talk on Tuesday the 14th of May at 7:30 Eastern Time, and I'll leave a description of that channel in the description if you want to check it out. But it's going to be a live interview. It's a very interesting channel and it's going to be a conversation, I think an unconventional conversation just about a variety of things, a variety of subjects. And so if you want to come and show support, I'm going to be on Glib Talk live at 7:30. So I had to get on here real quick and talk about Trevor Noah because, out of all the things I could talk about, this one is something that actually enraged me a little more, but more so because I want to not just make this about Trevor Noah because he's just one person, but make this about our people, African people, the most disadvantaged people, the most taken advantage of people, the most oppressed people, that we have to stop having these people in the media who we think speak for us. And I was not of the impression that Trevor Noah spoke for us. I'm not saying that. But I think a lot of us, we look to celebrities because we are in a very celebrity-centric culture to be a voice of reason. Which is why a lot of times whenever you have a celebrity come out and say something stupid about black people or say something offensive about black people. So whether it's a celebrity might come out and say, like Kodak Black coming out and saying that black woman, or he's not attracted to dark-skinned women. Or you might hear someone come out and say, white people aren't that bad. And we all go in on them because I think we're of this false impression that these celebrities are for us. But you have to remember the reason why they're celebrities 9 times out of 10 is not because of their connections to the black community. Not unless you're someone like a Spike Lee, not unless you're someone like a Denzel, someone like a Samuel L. Jackson. Most of the people who are celebrities, especially in 2019, went through white institutions, went through what were starring in white movies before they got that status. And they really had no fame in the black community separate from their fame inside of the white community. So that's important to remember because you have to remember that there are people who might say things that go completely against our interests. And we want to believe that these people who look like us are going to speak for us and speak for us correctly. But we have to be very smart and understand that these people are not paid by us. They're not funded by us. And they're not really for us. And a lot of these people have no connection to our communities. And they're only here to play the tokenized black person inside of certain situations. And in this particular instance, we're going to talk about Trevor Noah. So just as an introduction, I used to love The Daily Show. And I don't like a lot of TV. That's the thing. Like, I rarely watch television, but I did watch The Daily Show. The reason is because Jon Stewart, who was, of course, the previous host of The Daily Show, I loved his take on things. I loved his analytical mind. Not a lot of comedians have that type of analysis. Not a lot of people are like Dave Chappelle. Not a lot of people are like Eddie Griffin, like Paul Mooney. Just there's so many to name. Not a lot of people have that analytical mind where they are not just funny, but they're able to cut up society into little chunks, dissect it, and tell people about this is the society that you live in. But tell them in such a way that the people who are given this story of society actually have to laugh at it, how ridiculous society is. That to me is the best comedian. It's not about how much money you have, how many movies you star in. To me, it's about that certain level of genius where you can take something that's so common that we deal with as black people, as people in America, whatever you want to be or call it, and you can make it so crazy and funny. Because it's crazy and it's funny because of how crazy it is. Whenever you can do that and you can actually reframe things and put a spin on it, that is to me a genius as far as a comedian. And Jon Stewart had that in a lot of ways. If you notice, Jon Stewart, he was very critical, obviously, of the right, of the Republicans, but he was just as critical of the left. And that is something that I appreciated because a lot of people it's easy to talk about Trump. It's easy to talk about George Bush. It's easy to talk about, you know, all these people who are on the right. It's easy to talk about them. It was easy to talk about who's the guy that just left? Paul Ryan. They're easy targets because a lot of the mainstream media does not support these people to begin with. So you're essentially going with the flow. But when you not just criticize those people, but you criticize the left, and then you criticize the establishment, that's something that is more powerful, because it's not just good enough to just be able to see the horribleness of Trump. You should also see the horribleness of Obama, of Hillary Clinton, of all the things that was done, Nancy Pelosi. Obviously now we got Joe Biden running for president. You should be able to see both sides being corrupt. You should be able to see both sides being anti-black, exposing anti-black rhetoric. You should be able to see those, and you should be able to call it out. And Jon Stewart, to me, would call out all of them, which is what made him a magical comedian. Now, when he left, they put a guy named Trevor Noah into his spot. And I was very interested to see how this guy would go. Because, of course, you know, the obvious thing is, you know, they picked a black comedian, but they didn't pick one from the U.S. And I'm not pointing that out to say that if you're not from the U.S., you can't analyze the U.S. or you can't speak on things going on in the U.S. But it's interesting when not just you picked someone from South Africa, but you also picked someone who is biracial, and you also picked someone who is more beloved in the white European industry. So all those things together, you know, was like, I wonder how this is going to go. And we kind of learned pretty quickly that he's not the same as Jon Stewart. He's very safe in a lot of his critiques. And to me, being safe, you could say anything about Donald Trump and be safe as far as job security, especially on these liberal networks like Comedy Central. So you might say, oh, well, he's, you know, criticized Trump. He's criticized these people. But when I say you're being safe, it's that you can't call out the BS on both sides. And overwhelmingly, most of his critiques go against things that are popularly held. For example, you're not going to get fired for advocating for transgenders to be able to be in the military. You're not going to get fired for that. You're not going to get fired for women's rights. You're not going to get fired for saying Black Lives Matter. You're not going to get fired for those things on those platforms. What you can get fired for is saying things, let's say in support of someone like a Farrakhan, or saying things about that criticize Israel. These are things that you can get fired for. And these are things we have seen a lot of people get fired for. So, you know, we've seen that Trevor Noah kind of plays it safe. And for that, you know, I kind of just, you know, stopped watching The Daily Show, honestly. Not to say he's always on the wrong side. He's said things that are smart. He's definitely said things that are, you know, positive as far as the Black liberation thought. But overall, he is someone that is of the establishment. He's someone that was put into Comedy Central. He was someone who was put into a certain spot. And if you were going to be a too radical of a black person inside of this spot, you probably would not be able to hold that occupancy. And you wouldn't be able to have the same liberty as someone like a Jon Stewart, to be honest. So, with that being said, you know, as far as Trevor Noah, it's the other things that he's done that I really didn't like is that you would see him kind of pick on African dictators. And I don't say pick on to say, oh, we should have sympathy for them. But I say pick on to say the way that he would talk about them. Because again, like I said, if you're a smart comedian, to me, you're going to analyze things. And when there's like something so blatantly horrible, so blatantly, you know, an inconsistency, you're going to point that out. And it's easy for him. For example, he has clips where he's always talking about, oh, well, America, y'all are dealing with this, but let me tell you about these African dictators. And he shows clips from African dictators saying horrible things, from African parliaments going into shambles and all these things. And his kind of point is that, oh, we Africans are way more crazy. But the missed opportunity is when you fail to add context to what is actually going on. And that is easy to be a clown and say, oh, look at these Africans doing crazy stuff. Look at them. Look at the corruption. Oh, look at what they deal with over there. But if you're going to be true to the craft, wouldn't you point out the why it is like this? So to me, when you point out African dictators, but you fail to mention that these African dictators are being funded by the United States government, by European governments, and you skip over that, and you focus on, look at how crazy they are, look at how crazy we are, look at how unorganized we are, but you don't even say why. And what to me that leads people to believe is that we're just dealing with all these things, dealing with all these issues, dealing with all this corruption just because, just out of nowhere, And you might say, well, people know it's because of colonialism. No, they don't. If you're really trying to enlighten people, you would tell them about the colonialism aspect of it. And you can do it in a very funny way because, again, it was so ridiculous what happened to our people that you can talk about colonialism in such a way that you bring to light the issues, and you can also talk about it in such a way that honestly shows how ridiculous and funnily ridiculous this situation is, because the same people who went and said that we believe in freedom for all, we believe in human rights, we believe in all these things, did the most catastrophic things to the continent of Africa, which is so ridiculous. So there's so much contradiction there. There's so much things to analyze and so much things to pick apart as a comedian, right? So, but if you're just going to talk about the chaos in Africa, you're just going to talk about the fact that, the governments are in shambles, the people are oppressed, by these dictators, but you're not even going to mention not just the past, but the present, because these people are presently being funded by this government, and you completely ignore it. It's funny, that's the other thing I really don't like about him. And this is not just him. A lot of people are like him. That he'll ignore it if that's he'll ignore it in these cases. But let's say we're talking about the whole thing that happened in Saudi Arabia with the journalist who was murdered. And I remember him criticizing the U.S. government's relationship with Saudi Arabia. So we could talk about the U.S. government's relationship with Saudi Arabia. We could talk about the U.S. government funding certain regimes when everyone's okay with talking about it. But when it's actually something that's happening constantly and that is violating the rights of our people, you're going to gloss over it. And that's what I'm saying. Like, to me, he's the definition of a puppet, because puppets say what the master wants them to say. It was popular to criticize Trump's relationship with Saudi Arabia when the journalist was killed because everyone was doing it. It was a New York Times journalist. He was someone who was beloved in the U.S., and everyone wanted Trump to do something about the fact that the government of Saudi Arabia was supposedly involved in his murder. So that was popular to do. A lot of people were doing it. So what is he doing? He's a puppet. He's going to say whatever his master says. But whenever it comes to things that people aren't talking about, so when we're talking about neocolonialism, when we're talking about the fact that the United States government is funding regimes who are going to go in, take resources that belong to the people naturally by your human right, take those resources and allow their companies to have the advantage, or the French government, or the UK, or any of these other governments that are in the position of colonizer. When those things happen, we're just going to talk about it like I think most people in the West understand it to be. And that is, oh, these Africans are so crazy. Oh, they're so unorganized. Oh, they're so this and so that. So that's why, I really just didn't really mess with him, honestly, because and it's not like he's not someone who knows these things, but he's omitted them unless they were popular, a popular thing to talk about. And anytime you're going to talk about the dictators who are in Africa, and you're going to leave out who's funding those dictators, and most importantly, how did they get into power? That's the most important thing, because we could talk about, let's talk about the Congo, let's talk about how horrible, that government is, but let's completely leave out the fact that Patrice Lumumba was assassinated by the United States government and replaced by, and the Belgium government, and replaced by a puppet. Let's completely forget about that. That adds no context to what's going on. that makes it seem like the people of Congo like this dysfunction. So we're leaving the person who's actually the one who has blood on their hands, the most blood on their hands, out of the conversation. That's why, basically, I haven't really liked him too much. So that went on a lot longer than I meant to, but I want to get to the point of this video. So, Trevor Noah did a video. I'm going to play the video in a little bit on The Daily Show where he criticized Julius Malema. And Julius Malema, to me, is I'm going to say the biggest, most influential, because he's not the only. There are a lot of voices on the African continent who are coming out against colonialism. But he to me is the biggest voice right now. And when I say the biggest voice, I mean the biggest with sincerity, the biggest revolutionary voice. He's that dude. And he had a video where he was joking about Julius Malema. But the way he was joking, like I said, didn't add context to the conversations. So I'm going to play the video right now, and then I'm going to come back and say what I think about this whole video.
My name is Julius Malema. And if you think Trump is bad, wait until you see how Julius treats the press.
These crooks who are calling themselves journalists. You see, the problem here at home is that we are not that advanced with our journalists.
How do you reassure the foreign investors?
No, you must give me a chance to speak unless you want to have this interview with yourself. You are a small boy, you can't do anything.
I didn't come here to be...
Come out, go out. Bastard!
Oh man, that is the best ending to an interview I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, forget no comments. I'm gonna go with that from now on. Trevor, why did you wear a t-shirt to the Met Gala? Bastard! Come on! Bastard! You bastard! And if you're one of those people thinking right now, you know what, Trevor, this doesn't seem too extreme. He just hates the press. Well, you might want to buckle up for this one.
Policeman that enjoys shooting at black people. You want to shoot? Are you thirsty to shoot? Go to Parliament. That Parliament is full of thugs and criminals. Go and shoot them randomly. Don't select.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
God damn! He just speaks about genocide like he's talking about remodeling his kitchen. He says like, yeah, so maybe I will break down that wall and change those cabinets and kill all the white people. But I don't know. You never know. I don't know. Actually, that sounds crazy. Maybe I'll leave the cabinets. You're right. Now, I hope it's obvious, but I do not support the killing of all the white people, all right? Yeah, that would be horrible. Half my family is white. I'd spend all my time at funerals. I don't have the time for that.
So there's a couple of things going on in this video. First, you have Trevor Noah comparing Julius Malema's relationship to the press to Donald Trump. And that is a grossly horrible comparison. If you look at the power dynamics in South Africa, Black people are over 75% of the population there. And white people are about 10% of the population there. Although white people are about 10% of the population there, they still hold the wealth and the power in South Africa. Most Black people don't hold the wealth, the power, don't have institutions. It's basically what's going on in America, but instead of them being 13, 14% of the population, they're actually 75% of the population, and white people about 10% of the population, yet they have control of the institutions. So the reason why it's very important to talk about that before you talk about any type of ill will he might have in particular clips of the media is because whenever you are the establishment means that you hold the power. You control the narrative. You control the media. The media is going to speak in your favor. So the media in South Africa, for the most part, is controlled by white people. And those white people have obviously white sympathies. And one of the white sympathies is to people who are there by way of colonialism, by way of genocide. So, of course, the history of South Africa is that South Africa, as all of Africa, is a historically black continent, and South Africa is a black country. And white invaders came to South Africa, displaced the black population, put them inside of these very small townships and took control over most of the land. So now here we are, years later, those same white people still control the land, and black people have no control of their own land. So the conversation now is that maybe, if we're talking about equality, we have to take that land that was taken from our people back from the people who stole it. And otherwise, if we just continue things on the way that they're going, we're going to continue to have the majority being in these concentrated areas that were set up in apartheid, and having people who benefited from apartheid, people who actually committed apartheid, which was an act of war to me. In the same way that you take any type of thing in war that was taken by an act of war, we're going to continue that arrangement. That means that you are dooming the black population to be inside of these concentrated areas where they will, to their hope, would probably die out. Or of course, we would probably revolt. But this is the situation that exists. Now, if you have a media that is sympathetic to the fact that these European people took the land from the majority and don't want to give it back, and they have the majority, the 75% of the people, living inside these crowded, dirty, horrible conditions inside of these small townships, and they're still not trying to give any of that land back. And you are the media and you're sympathetic to the people because you say, well, it's their property. They didn't do anything. It's not like they actually, were the ones who colonized South Africa. They're just their descendants. Then you're going to have a difference of opinion, obviously, but also a difference of lifestyle, difference of perspective. For Malema, he's speaking for the people who have been robbed, raped, who have been pillaged for all of their resources for decades, for centuries, by the European people. So obviously, when you have him come out and say, we want expropriation of the land of South Africa without compensation, which simply means that we want to take back the land that was taken by the white invaders, and we want to use it, redistribute it, without compensating the people who actually took it to begin with. And you have, again, a media that's sympathetic to the people who took this land, whose ancestors took and stole the land. You're going to have, obviously, an adverse relationship. And that's really what exists. So, of course, the media, South Africa's media, a lot of them hates Malema. A lot of them are sympathetic to the power structure. Even ones in blackface, a lot of them are sympathetic to the power structure because they get funding from the power structure. So to compare that, someone who is dealing with a whole system that wants to maintain white supremacy in South Africa, wants to maintain the systematic racism that exists in South Africa, and does not want to disturb that power relationship, to compare that to Donald Trump, who hates the press, and, for the press is biased against Donald Trump. You don't have to like Donald Trump to, recognize that. When you watch CNN, and they're going at Donald Trump nonstop, and then little headline goes by and says something that's actually significant, like, for example, the tax law or whatever, or the trade wars between China, yet they're so focused on the Mueller report, or did he conspire with Russia? The press is clearly biased against him, but Donald Trump actually started that relationship, first of all, because obviously in the beginning he was very much anti-press. Also, we know that a lot of the press love the Clintons, but it's a completely different situation. It's not that Donald Trump, that he represents something, or he's speaking for someone who the press is adverse or against. Instead, he's actually a part of the establishment. He's actually a part of the establishment, but he's a part of the establishment that talks too much, meaning he doesn't have a censor on his mouth to say, maybe I should not say this, maybe I shouldn't say that, maybe I shouldn't offend this person. Malema is not a part of the establishment. Malema is anti-establishment. To compare those types of anti-establishment, Donald Trump, who owns hotels, golf courses, Donald Trump, whose children are all helping him run the country, who was privileged just from birth, to compare those two. And then you add on the element of racism, obviously, that Malema is not just dealing with the establishment, he's dealing with a racist establishment that does not want to see black people have anything close to equality. You're dealing with that. That is a completely an unfair comparison. And it's honestly, I don't use this word too much, but it's like a sellout. It's some sellout stuff to say, because you're minimizing what happened to South Africans. You're minimizing what Julius Malema is talking about. You're minimizing what the atrocities were that put Malema in that place to be so upset, to be so angry enough to actually say these things and have a hostile relationship with people who are not going to try to give power back to the black people. You're completely minimizing those things. So that's the one thing that's going on. But then in the other part of the video, he gives little clips of things that Malema has said to try to say, oh, if you think Trump is horrible or crazy, oh, look at this, and these are clips that are completely like short and taken out of context. Malema said, he said, I don't plan on killing white people. I don't want to have a genocide, but I can't say what's going to come after me. That's what he really was said in the full clip, if you ever look it up. To make it seem like he's saying, oh, white people, we're just going to kill them. I can't, hey, whatever happens, it's what it is, what it is. That's completely not what he was saying. Not only that, but what he's saying is realistic. A lot of people don't want to deal with this truth. The fact that things were taken from the South Africans the same way things were taken by the white establishment, by African Americans, and they were done with bloodshed. Can you really assume that there's never going to be bloodshed when it comes to things being in reverse? Can we really make that assessment? We're told, the only, we're told by the people who use bloodshed and violence against us that the only way that we can get freedom is through peaceful protest. That's not intelligent, and historically, that's a really weird assumption to think that, you all got this power through killing and genocide. And to think that the people who you oppressed and committed genocide against are not going to turn the tables. I mean, to me, number one, it's an arrogant assumption. But people are so safe now that they feel that way. But it's also just not historically accurate. I mean, there's been so many wars that have occurred because of colonialism, not just black on white versus black versus black. All of these things were caused by colonialism. And so for him to say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, he's being honest. He's not going to lie and say, oh, black people, we pose no threat. Black people will never retaliate, because you can't, number one, you can't speak for all black people. You can speak for, like, let's say you're Dr. King and you have a certain ideology. You can speak for people who follow your ideology, but you can't speak for the Nation of Islam. You can't speak for Malcolm. You can't speak for Elijah Muhammad. You can't speak for the Black Panther Party. You can only speak for those who follow your ideology. So to me, what he was saying was, we don't advocate violence against anyone, but I can't say what's going to happen after me. I just can't. So to take that and to just make it seem like he's just like, well, I don't care if white people die. I don't care if people get killed. That completely twists his words. So now we're dealing with another level of selling out. And that is the level where you take things that black leaders say and you take it out of context. You make it very short clip. You didn't even give him a chance to explain himself. There's a clip, if you watch the whole clip, in fact, I'm going to find a video. I'm going to post it in my description. If you see him explain himself, like, why would you cut a black man off who's trying to explain the ramifications of racism off? Why would you try to cut him off? Wouldn't you let him explain himself? But that's a whole nother level of not just selling out, but it's acting as the oppressor. Because what do we know that they used to do before? We know that they would take a small part of a word, they would make that the whole thing. That was one of the reasons, that was one of the ways that the mainstream of America had turned quickly against the Black Panther Party, quickly against Malcolm. They would take a very small part of what someone says, and they still do. I mean, look at Farrakhan. Perfect example I'll actually use right now. So a lot of people, they say that Farrakhan is anti-Semitic, whatever that word means. to you, because a lot of people, it's like, how could you say I'm anti-Semitic? Because being a Semite is being Arab, and being you could be an Arab, you could be a Hebrew, or you could be I forget the other one. But it's Arab or Hebrews. Those are people who were Semitic. And so if I'm anti-Jew, that doesn't necessarily make me anti-Semitic. But how do we have this term that only means one thing? That's very biased against people who are Arab. So, that's just something. It's a side note. But as far as the term anti-Semitic, they label him that one because he had a speech back in the 80s, I believe. And in that speech, he said that Hitler was a great man. So they take that one part of what he said, and they put it all over the press, all over the newspapers. They make it the headline. Farrakhan calls Hitler great. And all of a sudden, people are against Farrakhan. And reasonably, because Hitler was a horrible, evil person, right? Well, if you listen to the whole clip of what he says Hitler was a great man. Then he follows up and says, I didn't say he was a good man. He certainly wasn't good for black people, because a lot of people forget Africans were also killed in the Holocaust. He says he's a great man. And when he goes on to explain great, he explains that he's talking about is the fact that, which is a historical truth, after World War II, after World War I, Germany was completely in shambles. The country was broke. The people were disheartened. And he was able to take that situation and make Germany the biggest power, the biggest threat to the whole world, build up the industries in Germany, make it a war machine that really decimated all of Europe. And the same way that we might say Alexander the Great, or we might say, whoever the Great, he was saying that to be able to do that, that's a great thing to do. Not great as in good. He was evil. He was horrible. But he was able to do something unbelievable. Now, if you just had that small clip, Hitler was a great man, and you didn't hear the whole context, then you're going to be given a completely different view of what Farrakhan said in that speech. And that's really what Trevor did to Malema. He made it seem like he said that I don't care if white people get killed, without explaining that it's, number one, he does not intend for him to be the one that kills white people. He does not intend for it to happen under him, but he doesn't know what's going to happen, period, because what has been done in South Africa was so violent, so foul. If you look up the history, read the history of South Africa, read the history of apartheid. It was so foul what they did. It was so disgusting. It was foul. It was everything horrible that you could talk about and imagine. Realistically, can we say what's going to happen later? No, we can't. So that's what he was saying. But to take that completely out of context and make him seem like this crazy man, it's unfortunate. The other clip, obviously, is Malema saying, you're going to shoot these men for being criminals on the street of South Africa. Go to Parliament. There's a bunch of criminals and thugs there. So what's wrong with what he said? He's saying, if you're going to take that action, actually shoot someone. If you're going to say you're going to shoot criminals, and you're going to ignore the criminals who are actually in power, then you're hypocritical. You're not really concerned about killing criminals. You're concerned about killing black people. All of these things need context. And yet we have an African man who speaks for the establishment, who is going with the narrative that this is a crazy guy, he's dangerous, he said he's worse than Trump, which is crazy. He's worse than a white supremacist. He's worse than someone who has blood on his hands at this point, because you have over and over again people who have shot up synagogues, people who have shot up mosques, people who have ran people over, people who have beaten up black people, killed black people, just for their idea of this, the ideas that this man has espoused in them, or that has reinforced in their mind. This is what has happened. So you're comparing him to someone who actually has blood in his hands, which is crazy. Now, let's step away from Trevor Noah, because again, Trevor Noah is an individual, and let's talk about generally What is the problem with us believing these people to be our heroes? I noticed personally that more and more in present time, we have less people in the positions of being inside of the media who actually do speak for us. When I say speak for us, they don't speak for us how the establishment's going to let them, but they actually speak for us out of sincerity. They actually internalize our struggles. They actually internalize the things that we've gone through and are not afraid to speak clearly about it. There's less people doing that. And the reason I believe that is because somewhere in my opinion, probably around the 2000s or something, or after that, we stopped believing in ourselves. We stopped believing in our institutions. And I'm sure a lot of things have caused that. Probably social media, probably the media giants getting bigger and bigger. Radio stations, of course, have gotten bigger. We don't have so much the community radio stations. Now we have these huge corporations, there's one I'm thinking about, but there's like basically one huge corporation that runs like all the radios around the country. We don't have that. I think Clear Channel, that's what it's called. We don't have the connection to the institutions that make us us, if that makes sense. So you have to go through a white institution nowadays if you want to be seen. Now, the other alternative is you can stay with the black institutions and work, lower, smaller things. But a lot of people aren't supporting those the same that they did. And I'm not speaking crazy. When you look at things like people like Spike Lee, people like John Singleton, these directors who were able to, I think the Hughes brothers, are those the ones who made Menace to Society? These are directors who had support from us. And number one, I think the industry has obviously been so inflated that they've been able to shut these type of people out. I'm not talking about these guys who already are now, Spike Lee's already in his own, legacy. But as far as new people, like people who want to talk about the truth, people who actually come for our communities, who want to speak truth, they're very silent. And yet you have a lot of people who go through the white institutions in order to speak, but even when they're able to speak, they're only able to speak when about things when it's allowed from the institutions. So when we have these things that are going on, we have these dynamics that are taking place, and we have this lack of connection to these people. We have to start realizing that 9 times out of 10, these celebrities are not for us. And I honestly think the rule that we should make for ourselves is that if you are someone who got your place through the establishment, you should probably assume, not to say that they are not for us, but you should assume until they prove otherwise that they're not for us. Every once in a while, you'll have someone who comes out and who does want to be for us, someone who comes out who does want to speak for us, but a lot of times that's not the case. And this is what happens with people like Trevor Noah. I think a lot of people wanted this to be like a Dave Chappelle type person that's going to say things that make white people uncomfortable and not really care. But he's not. He's someone who recognizes that, hey, he was put here by certain people, and his job is to entertain those people. If black people get entertained while he's entertaining those people, good, fine. But ultimately, his job is to entertain those people. This is what is the reality for most comedians, most actors, most actresses, most singers, rappers, most people in the entertainment industry. It's a reality that they're just not here for us. So if we understand that, then we're going to have to start making an ideological separation and understanding that, you know what, it's okay, because we're not going to validate these institutions anymore. We're going to validate our own institutions. We're going to validate institutions that actually do speak for our people and actually do represent our people. That's the only way that we can stop allowing ourselves to be put in a spot where we look like we're being spoken for by people who aren't speaking for us, and we feel let down by these people, and we feel disenfranchised even more because not even just the white establishment, obviously the white establishment wouldn't talk about our issues, but even the blacks who we see on TV every day, they're not going to talk about our issues either. They're not going to talk truthfully. They're not going to speak truth to power. Instead, they're going to try to maintain the power position that their master has in this country. You know, and I just want to say one more thing, you know, with Malema, he's a revolutionary, and most people are not revolutionaries. When you're a revolutionary, you are saying that you want for the power dynamics to be turned on their head. You don't, meaning you don't want the same institutions in Hollywood, anywhere, New York, wherever, to continue being the same as they are. You want these things turned on their head. You don't want to keep seeing Pixar movies or Disney movies. You want to see a different type of dynamic happen to where these people who had power no longer are able to have this position of power over us, but we're able to have positions over ourselves. That is what being a revolutionary is. Malema is a revolutionary. He's saying that I no longer want to live in South Africa, where white people own all the property, where that was stolen by their ancestors, where they're able to use that against the good of our people. That's he doesn't want that to be the dynamic going forward, and instead he wants there to be a day where Black South Africans have power over their own selves and over their own destiny. That would completely turn things on their head, and not just South Africa, but if that were the case in America, if that were the case in Africa, period, where we all had control over our own destinies. So understand, most Black people don't want that to happen. Most get their paycheck from people who don't look like them, and because they've as long as their life has been, as long as their mother, their grandmother has lived, that's how it's been. So the thought of saying, well, you know, we can get those paychecks from Black people, that actually is scary to some people. That's actually threatening to some people. I mean, think about the whole slave plantation. If you've been getting things from master, if you've been getting fed by master, he gives you shelter, he gives you places where you wash, everything, your clothes, everything you get from your master. And some slave says, hey, you know, we can do this for ourselves. We can have our own civilization. We can actually, instead of working on a plantation, we can own a plantation. And you say that to someone who their whole life, in their mother's life and their grandmother's life, has always been master who's been doing these things for them. That's going to mess with their head. It's going to mess with their understanding. It's actually going to mess with their way of life. And that's what we have today. Whenever we hear people who only want to talk about Black progress, so in such a way that it's only going to be white people still having control, but sharing the control of Black people and not Black people owning, that means that you're caught in a plantation mentality. You can't imagine Black people owning their own world, their own life, their own country, anything. So when we talk about things that happened before history, you know, you're like, well, you know, that's not my reality. You know, I can't have a Black Wall Street. That can't happen. This is what we deal with. So understand that being a revolutionary means seeing something that most of us haven't seen in our lifetime, and seeing a power dynamic that does not exist yet, but believing that it can exist as it has existed. That is what we're talking about. People like Malema, who is a revolutionary, he will always be cast in a negative light because of his affiliations and because of his belief and because of his convictions. So let's not be surprised. Let's understand it is what it is. But also, let's just call this dude out. Like, Trevor, no, what is wrong with you? What are you thinking? Like, whatever. You know, you clearly don't represent the poor, the disenfranchised. You clearly represent those who only want to keep to and maintain the system. So let's not be confused about his stance anymore, nor all these other people, again, who work in Hollywood, who get what they need, their lifestyle, their sense of being from those who actually do oppress them. Let's just know what time it is and let's know what's going on. So that's all I have on this, y'all. I would love to see y'all's thoughts and your opinions. I will see you all in another video.